A great pleasure to welcome to Northshire Live Cree LeFavour. She's the author of the memoir Lights On, Rats Out, numerous cookbooks, including the James Beard Award nominated Fish, and her debut novel, which she's presenting today, Private Means. Michael Cunningham, the award-winning author of The Hours, says that Private Means is a lacerating, laser-eyed look at love and its countless manifestations. Cree performs an infinitely complex, exquisitely painful surgery on the human desire to love and be loved. And we are delighted that Cree is joined by Dwight Garner, book critic for the New York Times, former senior editor of the Times Book Review, founding book editor at Salon.com, and Cree's husband. His forthcoming commonplace book, Garner's Quotations, A Modern Miscellany, will be published in November. Please join me in welcoming to Northshire Live, Dwight Garner and Cree LeFavour.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I've got my Northshire book mug here. I'm set. Hi, Cree.
Hi, Dwight. How's it going upstairs?
You know, I miss bookstores. I really miss crowded books. I miss Chris Morrow's bookstore. I see Chris up in one of these boxes. Hi, Chris. Don't you wish we were in front of people, with people?
I do. I really wish it. And, you know, events in bookstores are so much fun because you get to actually go shopping at the same time. So right now we're all just stuck in our houses and that's the way it goes. So we're making the best of this. And I really appreciate everyone who is willing to open their computer at 5 p.m. today and watch us talk to each other, because it's an unimaginable stretch. You know, if you just jump back in time just a tiny bit, to imagine that we would be doing this for a book event. So we're going to try to make it fun, right?
We are. And listen, congratulations on your novel. What's it like having a novel come out during COVID? Does it feel strange, or what does it feel like?
It feels really strange. Just kind of the same way everything else feels strange right now. I never imagined that having my first novel come out would be kind of a even more private kind of event in some ways, like not talking to people about my book in person, not sort of handing out copies, not signing copies at a table, all these kind of tactile things that really make, I don't know, make a celebration, make like the publication of your book or any kind of event like that a celebration, have to do with sort of interacting in person with people. So I gotta say it's a little sad, but, you know, we're all doing the best we can, and I am grateful to have a book come out at all. So,
well, tell our listeners a bit about Private Means. I mean, you know, it's a book that does a lot of things, and in your mind, tell us about it.
So the book is about a couple, and it takes place over the course of a single summer. So it begins on Memorial Day and ends on Labor Day, the most defined sort of summer calendar you can imagine. And it's based on, they live in New York City, and they are traveling to visit various friends on the Cape, and they have his elderly parents live in Vermont. Let's see, they go to the Berkshires and they go to the Hamptons. So they sort of do what New Yorkers kind of do, which is try to get invited out of town if you possibly can, because it's hot as hell in the city. And if you get an invite to go to someone's nice country house, then you do it. So that's kind of what they do through the course of the novel. There's also a dog involved. The dog, who is the wife's beloved dog, Alice, is lost at the beginning of the book. So we're introduced and the dog has been lost. So that's kind of just like a little undercurrent that's occurring throughout the narrative. And their marriage is in trouble. Did I forget to say that? Their marriage is in trouble.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to talk a bit about their marriage.
So their marriage is what I think a lot of people's marriage can be at various points when you are with, and it doesn't need to be a marriage, obviously, just a couple, points it can reach after many, many years together. So you and I, Dwight, have been married 26 years now.
37.
Yeah. You know, we've had some really dark periods. I certainly drew on some of the darker periods in our marriage.
Don't overstate it, for Christ's sake. Anyway, go ahead.
For this book, only in the sense that this is not a book about our marriage at all. Having said that, I think I was curious to explore the idea of what happens to couples who hit those really low points in their relationships and then stick it out. And then you see them 2 years later and they seem okay. And you wonder what happened. You wonder what made them stay. I was really fascinated by the idea of, or just the pull. It's both a positive and a negative pull of family and all these connections. We own marriage and coupledom and having children. Those are really sticky things. They pull us in and keep us in relationships, sometimes to our detriment, sometimes to our benefit. So I just was really curious about what happens when things aren't so shiny in a relationship, and what kind of choices people make about that.
And it's kind of an empty nest novel too, isn't it, to some degree?
It is. And I think that for a lot of people as well, that is a moment, and it certainly was. I know for me, when the kids started closing their doors and kind of didn't really want me in their presence, didn't want to be in my presence all the time, the way little kids do. It was kind of it was a crisis. It felt really scary. And then when they actually left the house to go to college, that felt just like a seismic shift in our relationship, because all of a sudden, you know, the people you've spent the most energy on and the most time thinking about are suddenly not in the room anymore. And it's after 18 years. It's a total reconfiguration of the marriage. I mean, we pulled a geographic. We moved to New York City from New Jersey when our kids left, which was, I think, I mean, at least on my part, I considered was a sort of self-saving move. But anyway, so I was curious to explore what happens when the kids are out of the house, the marriage feels stale, and here, that's what I dreamt up a scenario.
And now enter the dog. Tell us about the dog in the novel, because I mean it's a sidelight. I mean it's a serious serious novel. It's a comic edge, and then there's this dog. So talk about how the dog works in the novel.
Well, the dog is kind of, I gotta say, I wanted the dog just to sort of push things into crisis mode for this couple. So I wanted to see what would happen to the Alice emotionally. That's the female. She's a scientist, actually. She studies murmurations, which are those wild configurations of starlings that form, you know, sort of patterns and groupings in the sky, giant clusters. So she studies the sort of mechanics of those birds, of starlings in general, and other birds that are in murmurations. But so I wanted to see what would happen to her when she lost this sort of thing that is the one animal or the one sort of being that she focuses all her attention on. So I think that pets can do funny things in relationships. So when the dog just disappears, all of a sudden I just wanted to see what would happen. And the characters sort of ended up telling me what would happen. And it was devastating. And it required her to seek kind of emotional solace elsewhere.
So you walk around New York City, and I remember with you, and you see all these lost dog signs on telephone poles. And do you think people ever get them back?
I don't know. I mean, I put this in my book because I kept seeing these posters in New York City where people are offering $2,000 for the return of their tiny little dog. And I thought, oh my God, what if that were my dog? And the thought was so devastating that I was curious. I don't know if people get the dogs back. I kind of doubt it. It's awful.
Was your first novel a slog to write, or did it come moderately easy for you?
No, I had a blast writing this book. I just wrote it I started it, you know, like sort of in April one year and finished it by Christmas of that same year. I wrote it really fast. And I wrote it about 3 hours a day, every morning. I just would work every morning, and I brought it with me all over wherever I happened to be traveling, and it just kind of unrolled easily. I find writing fiction a lot of fun when it works. And having said that, I mean, I've tried to work on a novel for the last year and it's gone absolutely nowhere. So don't worry. writing fiction does not come naturally to me necessarily. This book somehow just wrote itself for me. And in many ways, the characters kind of took over and did that magical thing where they were propelling the story forward in ways that felt a little unexpected to me, which I love that feeling, where it's sort of like, I think it's really the writer's sort of subconscious kind of kicking in and letting that flow happen so that the book kind of writes itself.
What was the hardest scene to write?
What was the hardest scene to write? I don't know. I mean, there's a big fight in the book that's sort of like the culmination. That was hard to write because it required sort of explaining the mechanics of flying objects that were going between the couple. So I really, I wanted to get that right. And I wanted to get the level of rage and try to articulate, like, if anyone, well, I think most human beings have felt just utterly enraged at someone to the point that they actually want to throw something or do something to them. So I had to bring the characters to that point and then let it explode in this kind of spectacular way. So it was hard to get right, and readers can decide if I got it right or not.
Well, the character in the novel, the husband character, is not me, but I want to thank you anyway for giving him lots of hair and making him 6 feet tall.
He's very handsome.
So at least,
just as you are.
Thank you for that.
Of course.
So you didn't really keep to a regular schedule. You wrote when the spirit moved you.
No, I kind of did keep to a regular schedule. I wrote every day, and I felt good about writing every day, and it gave me a license to sort of feel like I could live my life all afternoon after having written only for 3 hours in the morning. But I don't know. I don't know how much really good, intense writing a person has in them each day. I think everyone's different. And so it was enough for me. Yeah.
So what's it like sitting there writing a novel when your husband, who usually is sitting 5 or 6 feet away somewhere, is a working book critic for the New York Times? Does that mess with your head in any way? I mean, I would hope not. I don't, you know, we've talked about this before, but I'm curious how you feel right now.
I think I've let it mess with my head before, and I've resisted letting it mess with my head now. I think what I did was I wrote my memoir and I just ripped that Band-Aid off. I just wrote and put everything down and out there, and I put my whole sort of, I don't know, vulnerability on the line with that memoir. And if you had hated it, which you can't lie, so it's impossible. You couldn't have said you liked it and then like had me believe that, because that's just not how you are, and I know that. So when you first read that, which you didn't read it until after my agent read it and liked it. So basically, to answer your question, I protect my work from you to some extent, because I need to have a certain amount of autonomy and space and sort of protection in a way from your very critical gaze, which is big and opinionated and has a lot of authority. And it does matter to me what you think of my books. But having said that, I can't have that in my head. So it is tricky, but I think I've, at least for now, figured it out.
Do you keep other things out of your head when you're writing? Do you not read other people's writing? What kind of things do you try to, what kind of goggles do you put on, or blinders, when you're writing?
Other than everything, I try to keep everything out. I don't know. I'm good at putting goggles on. I like goggles. I
have blinders, but anyway, we're all wearing.
Yes, blinders, goggles, whatever works. Yeah, I mean, I mostly read older fiction. So I read a lot of 19th century fiction. I read early 20th century fiction. And I don't know, I don't read a ton of immediate contemporary fiction. And I think that would get in my way. So I wouldn't want to read something that's trying to do something similar to what I'm trying to do on my own book. When I was writing my memoir, I wasn't reading a lot of memoir. And I wasn't reading, Fleischman is in Trouble when I was writing this book, because that book is also about a bad marriage. But I might read, something much older, like Middlemarch has lots of bad marriages in it, but that's not going to get in my way.
We should tell readers that you're sitting now in front of what are basically my bookshelves. And if you see Dennis Johnson and whomever back there, if you were in Crees' office right now, you would see all of Trollope, Henry James, who else? Wharton. Anyway,
yeah. I mean, my books are like older and mostly paperbacks, and they're kind of yeah. Our bookshelves are really different. You're a much heavier on the nonfiction than I am, and I read nonfiction when I kind of feel like I have to. It feels a little like homework sometimes to me. I'm happiest when I'm reading a novel, for sure.
You like to escape.
What's that? Yes, I'm an escapist. Yes. And
I think we've talked about this. I think you said you hope readers view your novel as a serious book, but also as an escape on some level, as an entertainment.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wrote my memoir, and it was the kind of book where people would say, "Oh, I read your memoir," and they sort of look like they're sweating and pale. And I felt really sorry about that, because it was a tough book to read. It was a really tough go.
You should tell readers quickly what it's about, because I don't think
it's about my sort of mental breakdown in my 20s when I was in therapy, and I was actually living in Burlington, Vermont at the time, and I was burning myself with cigarettes, which is a really extreme sort of self-harm thing to do. So I wrote all about that and about falling in love with my psychiatrist. So it's a really tough book to read, I think, for some people. I mean, a lot of people really liked it. And I think it means a lot to people. But I really wanted to write a book that I could say to someone, here, take this to the beach. It's so much fun. You're gonna have a blast reading it. It's a little bit snarky. It's a little bit sarcastic. It's hopefully a little bit funny. And I'm trying to have a little fun with it. Like I wanted a book that people could just like dive into, sit by the pool and read, just happily, blissfully, forgetting about everything, which we could all use to do a little bit right now, I think. So anyway.
So talk to us a bit about the title. I mean, I like the way it works on different, Private Means has a money aspect. It also, to me, has a kind of internal fortitude, the private means one carries into the world. Where did the title come from, and can you talk about it?
I came up with the title when I was having a conversation with my agent for just talking about what kinds of things I wanted to write about, and about the kinds of private spaces that we give, or privacy we give up within relationships too. So I think to most people the term means like you have a trust fund. If you have private means, oh, well, she has private means, she's just a trust fund or something. So obviously the phrase kind of comes from that. But as you say, and this book is definitely about sort of status in some ways. I mean, there's a lot of the things that we use to distinguish one another's sort of class status in this book. And I'm making fun of those distinctions in many respects, like, brand names and too much wine and fancy cheese and organic Icelandic yogurt and all these kind of like little markers of, what makes us who we are, or think we are who we are. I don't know. They're a language, I guess you could say, in some ways. So there's that. There's the sexual angle. That's always fun. Private means. There's like sort of, because this couple sort of entertains themselves. The male character is a psychiatrist, and he's lusting after one of his patients, which makes me quite happy. So I had a good time with that. Having flipped the tables on my previous experience in my memoir. So did that answer your question? I think it did.
Yeah, there's a lot. There is, you mentioned there is a lot of food in this book, and some listeners may not know that you come from a food family. Your father was a well-known chef on the West Coast, and you've written some very good cookbooks. How does food? I mean, you talked about it a bit, but I think you're happy now not to be out of the food world.
Well, I mean, I wrote a lot of cookbooks. I wrote 4 of my own, and then I ghost wrote one, and then I co-wrote another one. And I was actually incredibly tired of feeling like I was at the kids' table a little bit. I was surrounded by writers who were working on fiction, nonfiction, criticism, poetry, whatever. Seems like everyone we know is a writer, and they're all doing something very serious. And I felt like there I was writing like these tiny little head notes to my little chicken recipes, which felt, I don't know. I mean, cookbooks are important, and I think it's a very different skill set. I'm actually proud of my cookbooks, but I'm really tired of the food culture in many respects. And I'm bored with it a bit. So, but there is a fair amount of food in this book. So I guess I feel like it's important, but it's not something I want to focus on.
Yeah. Can you talk to us a bit? I mean, people are out there listening, thinking about reading your book. I hope everyone will. Has it been easy for you to read during COVID? I mean, have you found, I know for a lot of us, the first few weeks were just devastated and couldn't find the focus. Do you feel like you've gotten your focus back as a reader? I know you're a real reader.
Yeah. I feel like I have, but I do feel like the first, I would say 3 months of the pandemic, I felt just sort of like brain dead. I couldn't keep my mind on the page. I like that feeling when you're just rereading the same paragraph again and again because you can't make it stick in your brain. I think you've been an example, and thank God, yes, it's come back. So I am so grateful because there's nothing better than having a great book and you could pass the whole day and there goes your whole day. You've just read the book, like done. But you have to, throughout this, you've had deadlines. You've read every week.
My dear, I get fired. I get fired.
Right. Well, those of us that don't get fired for not doing our reading. Yeah.
And I know you also listen to a ton of books on tape when you're not reading. Do you like hearing your novels read aloud, or your novel and your memoir?
I did the reading for my own memoir, which was very challenging. I realized what a hard job that is. So I think it makes sense actually for a memoir for the author to read their own work. But I think for a novel, it can be a lot better to have somebody else who's a pro do it. And so I picked somebody out to read it. It's always funny because it always feels like the tone isn't quite what you imagined, or, I think she does a wonderful job. And I hope that other people think so as well. I'm super impressed, and she did, the intonations and the voices and the sort of different attitudes, but everyone's reading is different than your own. So it's a little bit odd actually to hear someone else read my book, I have to say. Yeah.
I know that you have strong opinions about audiobooks. Who is the woman you love the most? What is her name?
Juliet Stevenson is an amazing narrator.
Actress from Truly, Madly, Deeply, right? That was a long time.
Right. Yes. But she reads all of Austen. She does Middlemarch. she's an incredible narrator. There's a bunch of that I love. And I am picky about my narrators, because it makes such a difference. Yeah.
Let's talk a bit, if you don't mind, about psychiatry, because it plays a huge role in your memoir, of course. And in this novel, you've chosen to write about a psychiatrist again. Why keep returning to? I know you have strong feelings about psychiatry and very multi-layered feelings. Can you talk a bit about why you wanted to have another shrink in this novel?
I just find I have a lot of fun with it. I think it reduces a lot of what we're thinking about, and a lot of our deepest, most private worries are able to be sort of put on display in a really condensed form. So I have sessions in this book that are told from the perspective of psychiatrists. So in my memoir, it was all obviously from my perspective because I was the patient, although I did have his notes. So that was actually partly from his perspective too. Anyway, my point is that I find psychiatry pretty fascinating. I find the sort of intense moment of the hour just a rich sort of conversation that is, for a novelist or for anyone who's interested in human relationships, it's sort of like a condensed version of what could take place over many days or many months or weeks. There's lots of fun sort of sexual strangeness that goes on in, transference, countertransference, all those good things that make it just juicy and fun, I think. It really was, I enjoyed being in the head or in the imagined head of my psychiatrist, Peter. Dr. Nutting in this book. It was a very different experience for me, and one I might have to return to. It's fun.
Different question. Do you have superstitions as a writer? I mean, when I write, I tend to bring I have a favorite mug, and I bring it in when I write. If I don't have it, it's not the end of the world, but I like my mug. If I have something I'm working on.
I mean, I've had mugs that I really needed to have, but it depends on how my OCD is flaring up, how badly I need my mug, but I keep breaking them. So when you don't have your mug anymore, it makes it really difficult to be, I mean, you haven't broken that very special mug of yours.
I've had it for years. It's amazing.
Yeah, I know, you're lucky.
Break it tonight now.
It's gonna break. It's gonna break. I hope I don't break it. That's all. So no, I don't really. I mean, I'm sure I do. I have a million superstitions about all kinds of things, but I don't think I do about that. And actually, in some ways, I think I endeavor not to have them and not to make it a fuss. So if I have a thought about my book, or if I have something I want to work on, I'll just pull out my computer and do it, and not make a fetish out of it.
Okay. Boy, I mean, here in COVID land, what else can you do? What do writers do when you talk to people? What do people do to get the word out these days? I mean, probably it's a question for our hosts, but I mean,
yeah.
It's just a question of doing some of these and trying to get noticed online.
I mean, I've tried to do, Instagram and Facebook and all those things, but I always find myself incredibly diminished by social media. It makes me feel terrible. Like I just don't like it. I don't think I'm good at it. I think some people are naturals at social media, and I'm just not one of those people. I make myself do it because I really want people to read this book, and I need to let people know what it's about and that it's out there. But I find social media really draining, actually. It's a little bit like that classic introvert extrovert thing. You either gain sort of energy from being on social media and it fuels you, or you just get sucked dry by it. And I'm definitely in the sucked dry category.
Interesting. Can you hold the cover up so we can look at it? Do you have the top right there?
Here it is.
A little higher.
It's got birds. A little closer.
Well, a little higher.
Oh, a little higher.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it has the birds. It has starlings on it, which I think is are quite beautiful. I think it's a beautiful cover. We had to work hard to get it, but Grove did a really great job. And Grove in general is just a terrific place to have a book come out, because Elizabeth, my editor there, is amazing. She's been Elizabeth Schmitz. Yes, she's wonderful. And I worked with her on my memoir as well, so I feel very lucky. Yeah. Now,
I mean, is it possible when your book is in the middle of coming out, and these moments, is it possible to work on new material, or do you find yourself just sort of just caught up in what's happening now?
I haven't been. I gave up on the novel that I was working on when the pandemic hit, because I couldn't even read, much less write. So I kept trying to go back to it, but it wasn't going very well anyway. And then the pandemic sort of shifted everything. I mean, it just changed the whole landscape of how we're thinking about things and what matters to us. And so I think if I do go back to that particular book that I worked for a year on, I'm going to have to really revamp it. And I think I might. I don't like to give up on something. I mean, I know there's a fallacy of sort of lost time, lost causes, like that you think, you've put in so much time on something and you shouldn't give up on it. But I actually feel like if I've worked on something for a long time, there's generally something there that I want to figure out or want to say, and that it's worth trying to dig around until I figure it out.
Are you a huge reviser?
I am a huge reviser, but I'm not a perfectionist. So does that make sense? I'm a perfectionist ultimately, I think, but I'm not the kind of person who can't keep writing until everything's perfect above it. So some people are just like, can't possibly write the next sentence until everything preceding it is just the way they want it. And I'm not that ruthless with myself. I write.
I'm not ruthless, which is why you've written 9 books and I've written sort of a half of one. So here's your method.
You do have a book coming out. Do you want to tell about your book coming out in November? I would like to hear you describe it. It's a lot of fun.
It's a little ways away. It's a book of quotations. I've kept since I was quite young as a reader what's known as a commonplace book, which is just where readers traditionally have written down favorite lines, favorite paragraphs from books they love. And these were more necessary back, before we had Xerox machines and things, because there might only be one copy, or before we had proper printing press, a town might have one copy of a book and you might never see it again. So you would write down things to sort of have and to have with you. And I've been writing down favorite quotes and paragraphs and lines in categories for about 40 years now. And I have this kind of critique of books of quotations, which is I find a lot of them really sort of dull. They kind of lean on, penny saved is a penny earned. And those are all really worthy things, but I'm tired of the same quotations. And most books of quotations skew to the upbeat, to sort of the chicken soup for the soul kinds of things. And most of the quotes in my book are about really dark, horrible things that will make you laugh and everything that goes wrong in life. I have a section on there's a lot of vomit quotes in there. I mean, it's just the other kind of quotation that I think books of quotation leave out. A lot of things that amuse us. One of the things I say in my introduction is that it's generally acknowledged among critics that the best lines in any novel tend to have the word fuck in them. And those lines cannot appear in the New York Times or many other places. So I've saved them all up and they're in this book,
There you go.
all the filthy quotes that I think are great. So it's that kind of book, and we'll see. It's an oddity for sure.
No, it's not an oddity, and I actually find it really beautiful. It's kind of a prose poem in a way, because it's not organized by category. So I love the way that you can actually read it as a book. Instead of just, you could open it anywhere and obviously find a terrific quote, but I really enjoy reading it. It's almost like your perfect little autobiography.
Anyway, Crees, right, there are no categories in it. It kind of reads like a long poem. The quotes just flow into one another, and I try to make them play off one another. So I've never seen a book quite like it. I'm sure there must be somewhere, but anyway, look for it on, the day after the election. We're all going to be either partying or killing ourselves, so maybe no one will read this book. We're going to be drunk either way, right?
The day after the election? Wow, yeah. That's a gauntlet to lay down to come out.
Election day or something. Yeah, maybe my publisher's trying to tell me something. Anyway, so that's coming out, and yeah.
It's good. It's good. Did you guys have questions for us?
So yeah, we can transition to audience questions. Folks who want to ask a question can either do so on camera and be part of the recording for YouTube, or if you want to type a question in the chat, David and I will read them out from there. And I would love to kick it off if folks are okay with that. You two mentioned a little bit about your process with each other in terms of, Dwight, it sounds like you only saw the book after Cree, your agent, had read it. I wondered, and I'm asking this selfishly because I'm also married to a writer, how you came to that process, how you came to that being the way that you were going to do this. And Dwight, is it the same in reverse? At what phase does Cree get to see your writing?
Well, I would say, I think Cree paid me a compliment in a way by saying that, I'm a critic and I don't really like to lie to people. If I don't like something, I'm not mean about it. And, if I'm talking to someone I love or a friend, but if I don't like something, I'll try to make suggestions and offer, ideas. And I will try to not just say this is not good, but Cree knows that she's written things in the past that I didn't like. And she wrote her memoir and her novel, and I thought they're both great. And so it was, and if I hadn't loved them, I would have said nice things, but also found things that I said you could work on, but I didn't need to. And in both cases, the books had already sort of, left home. And I think that worked better for her. Cree, take it over, your mind frame.
Well, I think I felt a little fragile as a writer, coming from being just a cookbook writer, which felt really sort of lowly, to trying to write a memoir. And I'm not sure, I was uncertain about my own, I was not confident. Lots of writers aren't confident. So I felt like I really had to protect my work from Dwight in some ways. Not that he was going to be so cruel about it, but that I wasn't sure I could survive his criticism. So I needed to have, we all have different readers. I think there are more friendly readers out there for everyone's work. you know, I mean, I have a friend who says she sends it first to her mom and then to her sister and then to her best friend who doesn't really read much, and then down the line, and then finally, I mean, ultimately the last person you want to send your book to is the New York Times book critic. Let's just face it. So I don't make that my first reader. That would be really crazy. Having said that, I really trust Dwight, and if I'm writing something shorter, I'll often just throw it his way and be like, can you, something that I'm not so invested in, I'll be like, can you clean this up for me? And he does a beautiful job.
And I tend not to show you my reviews only because it seems like there's so many of them. I mean, if I'm stuck on one, I'll show you. If I think that I'm worried about a point, I mean, you always have great advice for me. To me, it's just sort of what I do. It's my date. I mean, reviews just come in and out so quickly that I don't even think about it. But longer things for sure.
Yeah, it's funny, those writers that pass back and forth, you know, the writers that sort of are like, oh, I show everything to my husband first and then he reads it. And I'm just like, that is nuts. I can't imagine working that way. I mean, I'm very private about my work, actually. I don't show it to anyone either. So I also know people who show things in progress to people. I actually show it to my agent in progress, but I don't show it to anyone else in progress ever. So I think everyone's just different. Yeah.
So we don't have any questions from the audience yet, but I'd love to jump in again. Cree, was the process, the actual sort of nuts and bolts process, very different for you writing this as opposed to writing memoir and cookbook, so both sort of different ends of nonfiction, or was the actual sort of words onto the paper part of things fairly similar?
No, it's a good thing to think about, because it's just, you know, when you're writing a memoir, obviously you're making some very explicit truth claims. So you need to keep things factual as possible. I was actually working with my file, which was handed to me when I left my psychiatrist. So I had a big fat over 200-page file of the notes he kept for each of the hundreds of sessions that I was there for. So I was trying to mine that for material, keep the dates right, keep the sort of like, you know, with the memoir, you're trying to recreate a sense as accurately as possible, this emotional state or this, you know, whatever kind of state you were in that you're trying to describe. With a novel, it's just you and your page. You know, it's a very different process. And with cookbooks, it's purely like, cookbooks are like writing a manual. I mean, they're you know, it involves, you know, literally testing the recipes several times and then correcting, rewriting. I mean, it is just a sort of technical.
Well, but also you're not you're more of an intuitive cook. So I don't think it cuts against the grain for you a little bit. Correct me if I'm wrong, to even write down recipes. I mean, I think
and to measure things for me is really super annoying. But when you're writing a cookbook, you actually have to measure things so that people can duplicate it. So I find it so annoying to do that, but I did it. So yeah, very different processes. I think novels are way more fun to write if they're going well.
Cree, you had mentioned earlier, just talking about cookbooks, this dovetails with that, that we wanted to give up on the whole aspect of it early on. What about cookbooks was it? I mean, Rachel and I have both talked about how we've sort of fallen in love with cookbooks. And I know, you know, measuring stuff, I don't measure when I cook either. That could be
right.
irritating, but could you
You
expand?
know, I don't know. I get a lot of, I do get criticized from people for sort of denigrating cookbooks in some ways, like saying that somehow other forms of other kinds of genres of writing are better or more important or more substantial. And I guess in some ways I do feel like they are. Like, I respect novels way more than I respect any cookbook. I don't care if it's Julia Child or Jacques Pepin or whoever. I just do. I just think it's a more challenging form. I think it's harder to put together. And I think it requires a lot more nuance and sort of, I don't know. So I do respect that. I respect it more, I guess, as a form. Having said that, there are cookbooks that are certainly could be considered literature in many ways. So I don't mean to sort of trash the whole thing. I think I've gotten weary of food culture in some ways. I don't watch food TV. I think the emphasis on, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. Like, I just think I think food culture has gotten a little out of control. I'm going to put it that way. So, and I rather just like remove myself from it slightly.
It's funny. I'm obsessed with cookbooks, and as a matter of fact, I'm writing a food book right now. It's not a cookbook of any sort. It's still a ways out. But if Cree panned around the room right now, and please don't, Cree, because I think it's a mess down there. But I probably have 6 cookbooks open. I mean, tell them. I mean, I just have them. I look at them when I have lunch. I'll flip through a cookbook. It's my reading that I just have around all day long, and I'm obsessed with them in a way that you're not. But you're also from a family that doesn't really. Your cooking tends to just be organic. It's what you learned and what's been passed along. That's how I think about you anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe because I grew up with it, I'm slightly cynical and slightly tired of it. I don't know. I mean, I grew up in a family. My dad is a chef, and food was always really central to my life since I was tiny. So I think for someone who's as old as I am to have that experience, like a lot of kids have that experience now because everyone cares more about food than they did. But I think it was a slightly more unusual experience for someone maybe in their 50s to have had that experience of food being so central for such a big part of their lives. I don't know. Anyway, theory. Anyway.
So we often ask our authors this, and Dwight, I don't know if you're allowed to talk about it, so you don't have to, but Cree, I'm guessing you can. What have you been reading lately that you liked?
Let's see, what have I been reading? I just read Wade Davis' Into the Silence, which is a book about Mallory's expedition after the Great War or 3 expeditions to Everest. Which I found really fascinating, and I find, I don't know, it's just that moment of after the war when England's whole empire was coming apart and the British were trying to do something grand by conquering Everest. It's a terrific book, and I would recommend it to anyone. I've also been reading some Graham Swift, which I love and I didn't know about before. I had never read him, and I read like The Sweet Shop Owner and Last Orders, and anyway. So what else? That's about it.
For me, I mean, I as I said, I'm working on this food project, and it's about food and literature. I don't really want to talk more about it right now, but I've been reading like I've never read before. It's like the Tour de France of reading. I've been reading so hard for the past probably month, because in addition to my job with the Times, I've been reading just many food books. And I've read a lot already, but I knew I had gaps, and I've been trying to fill them. But in terms of novels, I mean, I've read 2 in the last month that, I reread Harry Crews's novel from 1973 or 1975 called Car. I don't know if anyone knows about Car, but it's about this man, I think his name is Herman Mack, who sets out to eat an entire Ford Maverick. And he's on stage and he eats this car piece by piece. And it's this grotesque, Southern fried, gothic, weird novel. And it seemed as good as I remember it. I mean, it's just strange and beautiful. And Harry Crews, I think, is quite a wonderful writer. And I also reread Absalom, the Faulkner novel, which I think now is just, one of the top 10 books of my life. It just explains so much about the class wounds of America and the racial wounds. I won't say race as much as region, but I just think that's Faulkner's best in my mind. So those 2. Car is a lot more fun. I think it's out of print. I'm not sure, but I had to buy it, I think, from a used book site.
It's available in a link that I'm putting on the page right now. It's an anthology book.
Oh, great. I was looking for it too, so that's good.
I was just going to say, I'm also reading, actually right now, I'm reading Elizabeth Wilkerson's Cast, which Dwight reviewed. So sorry.
Isabel.
Yeah, Isabel. It's terrific. So it's stunning, actually. Really stunning. So highly recommend that.
Yeah, that's actually on my list, actually, Dwight, largely based on your review. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, I really went out on a limb for that book, and I've gotten a little bit of blowback for it because my review was just, this was one of the great nonfiction reading experiences of my life. And when you feel that way as a critic, you can't always, I mean, you try to analyze it and get on the page why you feel this way, but at heart, it's an emotional reaction that I just had for this book. And I think that it may not be a brilliant original work of scholarship, but she stands on the shoulders of so many scholars and writers and thinkers and puts this material together in a way that she's a great popularizer. I mean, I would compare her to like Barbara Tuchman about World War I or something. I haven't read, I'm not sure I want to stand by that in the long run, but she takes things that other people have done and makes them just really powerful and palatable. And she's a great storyteller and thinker. And I just think it's really great.
I'd just like to second that. I'm about 100 pages into it, and the way she finds analogies and metaphors and these things are amazing. And I'm from Louisiana, and I had a very strange experience actually when I was reading it. I was reminded of a couple of moments in middle school history classes that were very unsettling in my education. Once Reconstruction was described as just a horrible time with those awful carpetbaggers.
Oh,
and then there was also a test in which we had to, we were marked wrong if we said the Civil War was about slavery. It was about states' rights. That was
Wow.
That was a really weird experience that sort of called up this Proustian memory almost. I was like, I had never thought about that.
Wow.
interesting.
That wasn't a question. It was just.
So, Cree, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Did your drinking habits change while you were writing this novel?
My drinking habits. What's that supposed to mean, Chris?
I'm just curious.
No, they
No.
didn't. Why? I guess I'm trying to get to why you're asking me that.
Well, I was just curious. How if
How much wine was I drinking? Is that what you're asking me?
What's that?
How much wine was I drinking while I was writing this book?
Well, if you're if there is an association between types of wine and writing fiction versus your memoir, or.
Oh, interesting. Well, having just revisited it after not reading it for a while, I was struck by how much drinking there is in the book. There's lots of wine drinking. So if anything, it probably propelled me to drink nicer wine, since I was writing about slightly nicer wine than I usually drink, like maybe a Chablis instead of like some sort of inferior French Chardonnay. I don't know. I would say had no effect, but I'm going to ponder your question and compliment your beard.
Oh yeah, thank you. My COVID beard.
It's awesome.
It's coming along.
It's awesome. I like your office too.
Unfortunately, my IT guy got this wide-angle camera for me, and so
It's
now
all
you
on
can
display.
see way out and the piles in the background.
It's all on display.
But congratulations, we're so excited.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having us. It's really great.
Too bad you can't be here in person.
I know. I really wish we could.
For the paperback.
I know. For the paperback, will you have me? I would love it.
So I think, oh, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I'm just saying, hopefully by then this will have passed enough for us to resume seeing each other.
That would be great. I hope so. I hope so.
So unless any other audience members have any last questions, I think we are just about out of time this evening. I would love to wrap things up with a very last question of my own, which is, there's a lot of humor in this book. And I wondered if the process of that was something that you had to work really hard on, if that was a point of a lot of revision, or if that was a part of the writing process that came very naturally to you.
So you've read it?
I've read a little bit of it, little snippet. I haven't made it all the way the files are.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough. So yeah, I mean, it's a little bit wry. Like I'm slightly making fun of this couple. They're based on, you know, people I've encountered through my life and people I've known in New York, and just observations of what city life can be like and what our contemporary sort of privileged existences can feel and look like. And I don't know, I find it funny. Human beings are funny. We're very, we're variable and unpredictable and mean and lustful, and we've got all these different different parts of ourselves. And I find I am forced to find these things funny. So if I communicate that at all, I'm thrilled.
It definitely came through in the part that I read.
Good. I'm glad. It's supposed to be funny. So it's if you don't find it at all funny, you might find it like kind of a bummer, I guess. Anyway, so.
Well, fantastic. Cree and Dwight, thank you both so much. This was a really fun evening, a great time. Audience, thank you so much for being here. Great to see a couple of people and know a bunch of you are there watching off camera. Thank you for being here this evening. We will see you later on this week. We've got J.R. Ward on Thursday, and then more great events next week, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks
so
for
much,
having
everybody.
us.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Good evening, y'all.